You may remember in like the immediate aftermath of the general election, we had all those absolutely wonderful articles asking the simple reason: why did we lose? What happened? And how on earth can we come back from this? And for a while, we went over, I think we went over at least 8 or 9 different articles from different people. And every single time we identified a key reason why they ain't coming back, why they could not identify why they lost. It is and always is a very simple and key reason. There is no self-introspection within the Conservative Party. They dare not look in the mirror and see at their policies, at their ideas, and what it has done. Like, they can't even look and think, gee, was austerity a really good idea or was it bad? After, 14 years of Conservative rule, did we leave the UK in a better or worse place? A very simple question they cannot answer, because they are still obsessed with this idea that, everyone really secretly wants Conservative rule, that we just need to be more conservative. That is the argument in vogue in the Conservative Party. But the other thing they are going to have to really deal with at some point or another is Brexit. Because, oh boy, oh boy, is that a millstone around their neck. Because sooner or later, they are going to have to sort of ask that question themselves. Was Brexit a good idea? And bear in mind, you had a lot of MPs yesterday in that, discussion about the EU saying, yeah, I think it's about time we had an impact assessment of Brexit. And bear in mind, there is a petition now going around for that particular impact assessment. So I will try and remember to drop the link beneath. If not, someone else, I'm sure, will post it. But I will post it as well other places as well. I know other creators are promoting that as well. So yeah, if you are in the UK, go get that signed. So we are going to have a look today at a Conservative Party canvasser, in fact, a campaigner who was campaigning down in East Devon. So he lost to the Lib Dems, really. And he is doing a 2-part special. So we're going to definitely do part 1. And when part 2 comes out, we will absolutely do part 2. You'll see why in a moment. But we're going to see, even after all this time, have they actually figured out why they lost, what went wrong, and are they going to be able to do anything about it? Well, given what we learned from all those previous articles, I don't think so. But before we get on into this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button down below. There is the Patreon page, the Buy Me Coffee link where you can buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button, and of course, as always, there is the Pony Club as well. So let's crack on then into this, because is this interesting? So, as always, coming from the absolutely, comedy site on the web, Conservative Home. So, Jack Barwell, with the title of Why We Lost and What We Need to Do Differently, Part 1, The Here and Now. And I can't wait, quite frankly, for Part 2. So, he was, of course, the Conservative campaign manager for East Devon in 2024. So, you would think someone who was, right on the front lines, right on the front line of the trenches in this loss, could see what had happened and why they lost. Let's see if he actually acknowledges the reality. Dare he look into the mirror and take on the reflection, or are we going to see, as I've said, the most in vogue argument amongst the Conservative Party that they just weren't conservative enough? So, here we are now, just a few months since electing Kimmy Badenoch as leader. The Conservative Party has managed to differentiate themselves from Labour due to the unpopular decisions this government has made without a mandate, from the winter fuel payment cuts to inheritance tax changes on family farms. But the biggest gainers in the polls so far have been Reform, capitalising on the lack of faith in the system and the actors of all stripes. Remember, if any Conservative leader ever wants to come back, they have to take on the threat of reform. And you do not have to go right into them. You do not have to follow them on a hard right path. But that is their seemingly, objective going down on this. There is a ton of stuff that Conservatives could bring up about the fact of, Nigel Farage's very close links to the Kremlin, all that kind of stuff. Do they ever engage in that? Very, 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 very rarely, because the Conservative Party, of course, had that whole group, the Conservative Friends of Russia, which we don't want people asking too many questions about. Anyway, let's get back into this. So, I know, of course, the difficulties, and the previous election brought firsthand as a 21-year-old who was the campaign manager for a successful first-time Conservative candidate who won by only 121 votes. So he narrowly won by the skin of his teeth. When you have such a small margin of victory like that, that is a tiny margin for victory. But a lot of the other Conservative wins were kind of like that. There were a couple of things that if they'd gone either way, that would have changed things quite a lot. They would have lost even more seats in particular. So back to this. So these were the problems we found on the doorstep. I dealt with, of course, within our campaign team, and it exposed why the Conservatives were in such a difficult electoral position and how we can fight our way out of it. So, what is he going to propose? The choice is simple. We either learn these lessons or fail to create an electoral brand and fall now into third place, which, to be honest, I think is what's going to end up happening, to be honest. So, why primarily we lost the general election? For 3 reasons. Can they do that? Can they actually identify the 3 reasons? So, firstly, we didn't deliver enough. Sort of, yes, in a way. After 14 years in power, people will expect you to be delivering, things to be better. But for a lot of people, a vast majority of people, it really was not better. And you cannot be a party for so long saying, oh, things are going to get better, things are going to get better, things are going to get better. It'll be jammed tomorrow. Don't worry. We've left the EU. Things are going to be, infinitely better now. So, across those 14 years, he starts with, we brought the deficit down. They decreased inflation, achieved record increases in education levels, record job creation, and cut carbon emissions more than any previous administration. So it is not that we didn't deliver at all, but we didn't deliver enough. And as a result, many now feel that we didn't deliver at all. So, first of all, increase in education levels. That is absolutely true. If you want to really have a look, and let's be fair, I've always said, hey, be fair. They did increase education levels. That is something that did happen. However, that was done at the immense cost to cutting a lot of education budgets. And teachers are, if you speak to any teachers, it almost feels like a lot of them are literally right on the edge of a nervous breakdown sometimes. It generally feels like that. I don't even know if you've ever know anyone who's a teacher in your friends or family group, but certainly feels like that when you talk to them a lot of the time. It really, really does. Record job creation. I'm not 100% sure on that, to be honest, because it depends. Certainly job creation numbers can be fudged quite a bit. So I'm not 100% sure on that they can claim that. Cut carbon emissions. Yes, they were doing a drive to net zero. They did do a lot of stuff and fund a lot of programs that have helped cut carbon emissions. However, as you saw with Rishi Sunak, if somehow he had won, he would have just absolutely ditched all the net zero stuff completely. We are lucky that we did change government. We are generally lucky that we did change government, and we do have a government that does believe in net zero, that does believe in climate change, that isn't climate skeptical, that wants to sort of make positive environmental changes and is doing, policies in that direction. That is good. So back to this. So when it comes to, of course, voters' feelings, unlike the famous Ben Shapiro phase, they really can matter more than the facts sometimes. If voters can't feel safer, better off, or more secure with regards to public services, then they doesn't really matter how much money is going into an institution. The voters will reject that government for failing to deliver. And here's the thing: public services were failing. Why? Because they kept on cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting and saying, you are a government, but we're going to ask you to do more with less. So it wasn't that, the state was over bloated. It was the fact that if you think you have all these people standing on a platform and the platform is this wide and, they're here, you just shrink the size of the platform. It gives them less room to maneuver, less room to do stuff. And eventually you do get to that point where they had massively reduced sort of, public investment in this. And they were getting to that point now, which we are seeing them do right now, that is advocating for mass dismissal of, public servants, a real, scything down of civil servants. That's why they are so into the Doge thing. That's why they are so obsessed with Doge when they talk about it, because that's where it was going. That's what they plan to do next. So, the honest truth is that when asked by voters whether they, of course, felt better off than 14 years ago, many voters could not answer yes. That was because that we weren't able to turn the tide. Because to turn that tide, you actually need to invest. You actually needed to invest in the country. And they did not. They did not invest in public services. They did not invest in infrastructure. They just did not invest in these areas where they said they were going to do. The leveling up white paper, classic example. The first two chapters, as I say, are absolutely remarkable, laying out exactly what was wrong, why leveling up needed to work, what they could do with it, and the money that was needed. And then you get to the actual treasury section, and it was like, no. And that's what had happened time after time after time. Oh yeah, invest in these areas. Don't think so. Happened every single time. Does he admit that? No. Because if you're not going to deliver, what about all those areas you promised to, level up? So back to this. So we were unable to, of course, turn the tide on, of course, expanding the state that was failing to deliver now stronger public services. Again, it wasn't the fact that they were expanding the state to deliver those strong public services. It's that those public services cost money, investment. And that's what had been gotten rid of. That's what had been gone. On, of course, increasing migration levels, both legal and illegal, that needed to come down. No, they didn't at all whatsoever. Certainly illegal did, but there were ways to do that. Legal migration, who cares? It's legal migration. If people want to come here and contribute to our society, great, let them. Who cares? Who cares how many people at that point come, right? As long as it's, legal, we have a controlled way of doing it, who's coming in. Hey, I'm fine with, all being legal. Make more safe routes. But of course, they're now becoming, as you can see right here, slowly obsessed with the legal migration as well. Always remember that when they talked about migration, when they were challenged on, legal migration, they were suddenly fine with, but it was the illegal migration. And now it's slowly becoming legal migration they're also having a problem with as well. So, and of course, now the spiraling deficits and inflation through poor economic management with lockdowns and, of course, the COVID payments going on for far too long. And, of course, Liz Truss's disastrous mini budget. So if you've got spiraling deficits at that point, that means you have to put taxes up. You have to start raising more revenue. That is obvious. That is everyone could see that happening right now. And Labour is going into that very, very same problem now. Hopefully they will realize that and go, yeah, we're going to have to start, raising more revenue, not, slashing revenue or, going into more austerity because we know that direction doesn't work. We've done that for the past 14 years. We know it doesn't work. Of course, complaining about lockdown and COVID payments. What about all that, COVID money that went to, your conservative friends? Doesn't mention that. I wonder why. Anyway, the Conservatives can, of course, not argue. The Conservatives that cannot, of course, analyze the last 14 years and reached, of course, these conclusions are now out of touch with what the average voter thinks, or at least very unwilling to analyze the dangers now of a growing state and the government overspend, whilst, of course, it originated in the Blair years under, of course, Conservative administrations. They're very sort of guilty of both. And what happened during the Blair years, though? They went, yes, people need, good public services, so we are going to fund them. You then go to this Conservative government who goes, yeah, we're not going to fund them. If you need £100 to do something and you give someone 50 quid, how well do you think that project's going to turn out? If you know they need £100 to do it, but you've only given them 50, good luck on it being, a successful project. Sometimes it might succeed. More often than not, if they said they needed 100, they're probably not going to succeed. So anyway, before we go to this, so yeah, his first idea that they didn't deliver enough. Part of that he does say here, if you cannot analyze the past 14 years, you have analyzed some of that stuff, and yes, some of the stuff you have got right. Some of the stuff he has got right. The meshing Liz Truss, good, but he doesn't mention a ton of other things. Doesn't mention austerity. Was austerity under the Conservatives a right idea to do, or did it make things worse? Was Brexit, of course, part of that economic mismanagement that he talks about? What about actually, taking all that money and investing it into poor areas? You know, things that, the Conservatives had actually ideas for. The Northern Powerhouse idea, levelling up. Yes, they were pursued by, Cameron and Johnson, but the core of those ideas, if they had actually properly fulfilled them, they would have actually been good. But because, as I said, we have seen what they do before. They go, oh, yes, we'll do this, but we need, X amount of money to be able to achieve that. And then they go, well, okay, here's like a fraction of that money you've asked for to achieve that. Now go and look, haven't we funded the North? Haven't we leveled up the North? So anyway, this is where it starts to get fun because obviously he is advancing the most in vogue argument in the Conservative Party that we weren't conservative enough. So what does he mean by this? So now this of course doesn't mean that we should pander to the right on every issue, but we mustn't take our base for granted when the base is saying what the ordinary voter up and down the country who does the manual labor jobs voted for Brexit and wants to see regeneration is saying. Why aren't you investing in those types of industries though? They never did. Oh, you did Brexit, but you promised them to level up these places, to go into that regeneration, and you never did it. The current Conservative Party, when it says it is not conservative enough, their ideas, their policies, their ideology does not pertain to that. Investing in those manufacturing areas, investing in those sectors. It just plainly doesn't. So, yeah, you weren't conservative enough. But you weren't listening to what those people who voted for Brexit were saying, that they wanted less, globalization. They wanted more investment, which is the exact opposite of what that guy has just argued for in that first point. Do you now see where you keep on saying no matter how much they try, they are stuck in this doom loop, continuous doom loop. Anyway, for years, of course, our base has argued for lower taxes, law and order on our streets, lower immigration, and leveling up in more rural and ex-industrial areas. And yet, if you lower those taxes, where do you get the money then for those, police officers? Where do you get the money then to run a good immigration system? Where do you get that money then to level up and invest in those rural or ex-industrial areas? Yeah, surely we can all see the problem in that. Yeah, in the last few years, we have failed to deliver any big leveling up projects. We've lost control of our reputation for economic credibility and seen by the highest levels of tax for over 75 years. They failed to take a grip and insist now on fair and robust policing, particularly during the protests. And of course, they now see legal migration levels into the 700,000s and have failed to stop the boats. Again, legal migration is good. It's good economically. But if you'd been doing all that investment, people wouldn't have cared as much about the legal migration. And as for the boats, there are numerous ideas, better ideas they could have pursued than the absolutely insane Rwanda idea. For the fact that if you look at it, the Conservatives actually built good social housing. The problem is they didn't build it here in the UK. They built them in Rwanda. you know, part of that, that base that, voted for Brexit that wanted to see regeneration. So yeah, they just weren't conservative enough. Anyway, and finally, and most importantly, we may not have been united as a team. Well, obviously. And where did those divisions come from? Where did those divisions come from? They came from Brexit. No conservative is willing to admit that all those big divisions, all those big infighting moments came from the right wing of their party, which they have pandered to more. They've had more of those MPs in, and those divisions have only grown larger. Is he going to have a look at that? No. So, the infighting, of course, at Westminster, the political backstabbing, the constant changing of leadership has now left the Conservative Party without an identity and may have lost us any credibility that voters can be sure that a leader will be seen through to the parliamentary term if elected. And why is that a problem? Why? It is because the fringe party or fringe faction indulged in regicide because they wanted Brexit at any cost. They wanted their pure Brexit, and they thought Theresa May would not give them their pure Brexit. So instead, they went with Boris Johnson instead, who basically gave them a watered down version of Liz Truss's idea. Well, not Liz Truss's, Theresa May's idea. And even then, they were massively unhappy about that. There was a lot of consternation during the Boris years about that deal. Because they always said numerous times, oh, don't worry, we'll get Boris in through the door. He'll deliver this deal. And then once we've got that deal, we can just drag us out even more and more and more. And that's what they've been doing. But there you go. Just an idea of where all that infighting actually comes from. So This is, of course, an unsustainable model that the backbenchers are now refusing to support legislation that the party, of course, put forward in their manifesto has left us now politically the equivalent of a football team whose best player wants to transfer and refuses to train. It's not even that it was like in your party's manifesto, it's the way that a lot of that stuff maybe was happening or that it was being done, or the fact that, maybe if all your party wasn't on board with that idea, maybe that policy wasn't a good idea to begin with. Anyway, worse, of course, still are the MPs who are now being asked to vote for legislation being proposed by new leadership where there never was, of course, a manifesto, such as the fracking bill under Liz Truss. All these issues are affecting the campaign that I ran in Exmouth. The failure to deliver meant the membership numbers decreased and the activists then refused to campaign, making it now harder to speak to voters, and we needed to win round in, of course, a very difficult election. Which, again, true, but this guy still hasn't looked his party in the mirror. He's taken a brief glance and then looked away. Brief glance and looked away. Identified some of the things in that first question. Not all of them, of course, because as far as they're concerned, their problems only really started, more recently. If only COVID hadn't come along, that's where our problems really began. Not, the rest of those 14 years. It's the same every single time. This guy thinks he's learned some valuable lesson. He hasn't. He thinks he has, but he is parroting the same mantra, the same doom loop as we have seen time and time again. And this is why I agree with him. The Conservatives are going to end up in third place. And it will be a very good day when that happens, because the Lib Dems will become the main party of opposition and our politics will change dramatically when that happens, shall we say, because I think it is now a matter of when, not if, to be honest, at this point. So the failure, of course, to be conservative, again, still pushing that idea. Again, it's not that idea, because if, again, Britain was yearning to, be voted or ruled by conservatives, why then did they not vote conservative or more, into reform? Now, it's not that they didn't vote reform, but surely we would have seen a lot more MPs if that were the case, right? So the failure, of course, to be conservatives meant voters, of course, defected to reform or stayed at home. The normally voted conservative. Love it. Defected to reform, or more accurately, the Lib Dems. And of course, the failure, of course, to unite and speak with one voice made it even harder, of course, to run a campaign. Those who, of course, were physically older but less experienced at campaigning did not want to listen to the younger but battle-hardened voices in our centralized campaign strategy. So instantly, he already admits it wasn't just infighting in the Westminster Party; it was fighting within the party itself. And guess what? A lot of those younger voices, those younger conservatives, had never ever really been listened to begin with. But now you've got a lot of these, like, quote, young conservatives speaking out a lot more, because a lot of those older conservatives have gone away. They've either gone and joined Reform, or they've just left the party entirely. And now they're finding they can speak out and they're speaking their truth. But this guy, what he has basically delivered is no more different to what one of those older voices that he complains would have never have listened to him about. So we must put our members, of course, back at the heart of the operation, making sure that the associations can pick from a full slate of 3 CCHQ approved candidates. Well, that's not what most people want. There you go. We also must make it more appealing to, of course, be a Conservative member, encouraging our associations to run more events and have more regular campaigning opportunities, get more local people out the doors for the first time in our constituencies, whether that be ahead of a general election or even the local ones. Right now, fighting hard in local elections could be so important determining the moment of individual constituencies in many of these seats, particularly in the Southwest, where I've worked in, of course, in the general election. Oh, he mentions the Liberal Democrats. The Liberal Democrats' success was most readily seen when Liberal Democrats had gained councils in local elections in the years previous. And then I'm looking forward to this because we will absolutely do this. Part 2, lessons from abroad. Oh boy, I would love to know what lessons he is going to be taking from learning those abroad. Anyway, at least he actually does recognize that, of course, Lord Dems, and there has been, as we said, past, you know, probably since they started campaigning for local elections, they're sort of realizing, oh, yeah, there's all of a sudden these Lib Dem voters around. Where did they come from? Yeah. Anyway, so let's have a look at the comments because the comments are always good at these articles. So someone here mentions it here. Yes, the failures you list are just the tip of the iceberg. Again, I agree. For me, he's missed so many on that. The Tories have failed on the UK almost everything of every single measure imaginable. Wrecking the UK with lockdowns. They didn't wreck the UK with lockdowns. The net zero didn't wreck them with that either. Open borders immigration. There is no open borders immigration. Record levels of debt. Again, it's not really record level. Out of control inflation due to money printing, while also losing over 100,000 kids from the education system during to lockdowns. Driving industry abroad due to energy prices. Again, they could have done something about that, but they just chose not to. They could have chosen to invest in stuff. Losing record NHS waiting lists. Again, if they'd invested in the NHS, it wouldn't have happened. We've actually seen, Labour do that. Shockingly, I know, but there you go. Allowing record numbers to go onto sickness benefits. Again, disagree that that's some sort of like target that we should go after people on. Again, I disagree with Labour when they saying the sort of the similar thing with that. Running down, of course, the armed services to the extent they are a joke. Condemning us now to future blackouts. Again, that's not really going to happen. Sowing the seeds of social collapse due to the nature of mass immigration. It's not. If for some reason we have a societal collapse in the UK, it's not going to be down to mass immigration. And of course, facilitating the woke takeover of our institutions. So yeah, someone else there who can't really see reason why they lost, but is certainly lost in the far right rabbit hole of that. Ah, yes, here's the old classic one. You are not a united team because you have a lot of rejoiners. Still, as I keep on saying, Brexit divisions, the whole reason why all these divisions, why all this infighting started, was to do with Brexit. Every single time comes back to Brexit and those arguments in and around Brexit. Every single argument you can see is like a 6 degrees Kevin Bacon back to Brexit. Why is this person angry about this? Oh, links back to Brexit. Kind of interesting. Will they ever have an actual reckoning, actual proper reckoning of of Brexit? Eventually, I think they will, but we ain't there yet. We ain't there yet by a long shot. I'm not 100% sure. Yeah, someone else says here, skirting over Brexit and, of course, Boris Johnson shows that the article is yet to be another hard-hitting, take no prisoners, tell it like it is, damp squib. Yep, Conservatives cannot bear to look in the mirror yet. Interesting on that, isn't it? Yeah. Someone else replies, no, they cannot bear it. The milestone of the last 14 years is hung around the Tories' neck, and it will not be given even a hearing by either recipients or lack of support for Labour. The politics is so simple. Finger those responsible, drive them out of the party, claim they have changed, not going to happen. Exactly. Just remembering, I read so many articles by the quote hard talking Tories who will quote, tell it like it is, but they then can't bring themselves to face facts. Ultimately, we have failed because we didn't make many people feel wealthier or happy after 14 years. People do not care about immigrants and culture when they are getting wealthier. Culture wars are just a short term distraction from our inability to drive economic growth and increase wealth for the majority of Brits. Wow. Um, that is again, every so often on Conservative Home, you look at, you see these conversations and comments happen like this, and you're like, of course, these people would be considered probably wets in the Conservative Party. Um, so again, Catherine the First, probably prominent, very blogger on this. Tell you what, if Catherine the First ever sees any of these videos and ever wants to have a talk with me, I'd be fascinated because this is a person who constantly comments on Conservative Home. We probably do not agree politically, but it would be an interesting conversation to have. Um, the biggest problem, she says, for or at least they say for the Conservatives, is currently that they are losing their identity and the better values by pandering to some of Farage's rhetoric out of the panic at Reform's polling figures. Yeah, that is very true. The Farage panic has been real for years, not just since, of course, the Reform days, going all the way back to the UKIP days. The Reform polls well because it is a protest party. It has never had to actually test itself or even compromise on its more ideological rhetoric by actually doing anything in government. This isn't a serious party for government. Very true indeed. Anyone who, of course, likes Farage and his rhetoric will support reform, not the Conservatives, being, of course, an I can't say it, intimation. But of course, the more Conservatives sound like the Reform, the less they actually become a serious party for government. Between Reform and the Conservatives, they are now guaranteeing that Labour stays in government for at least 2 terms. Very true indeed. Like I say, that right wing vote, so many Conservatives understand the fact that the right wing vote is split. They cannot win without that, but they ain't going to do anything about it for a long time. The Conservatives are going absolutely nowhere until they get a leader with actually ideas of their own, offering a very clear leadership and in trying to engage voters with a credible plan for government. Yep, someone says it here. Do you think it's now a little too late to now be having the defend Boris and his Etonian Farage stick? We have been tacking further to right since the days of Cameron. Why didn't the reasonable Tories speak up when we still had a chance to win the centre? Now we are never going to be trusted by the centre right voters. Very true. That is very true on that one. I will agree with him on that one. It, of course, is difficult for a Conservative Party, of course, to tack to the right of Cameron, who was, of course, very comfortable to have a pact with the Lib Dems as an excuse for doing absolutely nothing Conservative. But the reality is the party did not subsequently tack right and indeed barely managed to tack to the centre. Again, comfortable, he had to have a pact because they didn't have a majority, so they had to go into coalition with the Lib Dems. And they didn't like it because they treated the Lib Dems awfully, so they were not comfortable. They actively did so much stuff against the Lib Dems during that coalition, but that's an entire talking point for something else, maybe another time. Again, the reality is this party did not subsequently tack right. It absolutely has tacked right on that. Again, Brexit was the primary reason for that. I can't even admit that. But yeah, as always, some interesting comments, as always. We'll definitely go into part 2 when that comes out, probably today, maybe at some point. But interesting. Interesting, isn't it? Once again, to quote that person, conservative article, tell it like it is. Didn't tell it like it is at all. But again, Jack Barwell, if you want to have a talk, that talk would be fascinating. I would be fascinated to talk with, like, one of these people. I think it would just be a bizarrely interesting conversation. Like I say, we do not agree politically, but it would be a fascinating conversation to have. I would admit that. I am very curious about how that conversation would go. But as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, hit the like, hit the share button on your way out. And of course, we'll see you all next time.